don't fly with black people. I don't trust them, I don't like them, and I certainly don't sit next to them for 8 hours." The words sliced through the hushed luxury of first class like a blade through silk. Vincent Blackwell stood in the aisle of Flight 847, his $4,000 Italian suit perfectly pressed, his face twisted with the kind of entitled rage that comes from never being told no. His manicured finger pointed like a weapon at the man seated calmly in a black man in a simple navy blazer who hadn't said a word. The Boeing 777 bound for London Heathrow sat on the tarmac at JFK, its engines humming quietly as passengers settled in for the overnight journey. But the usual pre-flight chatter had died completely. 180 passengers held their breath frozen by the venom in Vincent's voice and the shocking audacity of his declaration. "Before we dive into this story that will leave you speechless, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city below, and if you've ever witnessed injustice like what's about to unfold, hit that subscribe button because this man's world is about to crumble in ways he never saw coming." Vincent Blackwell was used to getting his way. At 52, he commanded a real estate empire worth $300 million, owned penthouses in 3 countries, and had never met a problem that money couldn't solve. He'd spent the last 48 hours in Manhattan boardrooms finalizing what would be the crowning achievement of his career, a $500 million property acquisition in London that would cement his status among the world's elite. This flight wasn't just transportation, it was his victory lap. 8 hours of champagne caviar and the satisfaction of a man who'd clawed his way to the top by stepping on anyone who got in his way. He'd specifically requested seat 2B a window seat, where he could spread out and enjoy his success in private. But privacy was the one thing Vincent's money couldn't buy tonight. The man in seat 2A sat perfectly still, his hands folded over a worn leather messenger bag. Dr. Samuel Rivers, though Vincent didn't know his name yet, possessed the kind of quiet dignity that comes from a lifetime of facing adversity with grace. At 48, he had salt and pepper hair, kind eyes behind simple reading glasses, and the steady hands of a man who'd saved more lives than he could count. Dr. Rivers had been reading a medical journal when Vincent boarded the plane like a hurricane, slamming his briefcase into the overhead compartment and immediately starting to complain about the quality of passengers in first class. He'd made snide comments about people who don't belong and standards being lowered, each remark designed to make Dr. Rivers uncomfortable. But Dr. Rivers didn't flinch. He simply turned a page of his journal and continued reading about new cardiac surgery techniques, completely unbothered by the storm brewing beside him. That calm reaction infuriated Vincent even more. In his world, people cowered when he spoke. They apologized, they scrambled to accommodate him. They recognized his superiority. This man's peaceful indifference felt like an insult, a challenge to everything Vincent believed about his place in the world. So Vincent decided to make his position crystal clear, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I don't fly with black people." The silence that followed Vincent's declaration was total and suffocating. It wrapped around the first-class cabin like a toxic cloud, making the recycled air feel thick and poisonous. Passengers twisted in their seats, eyes wide with shock and discomfort. Some pulled out their phones. Others simply stared. Vincent Blackwell stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for the validation he'd always received. Born into wealth and raised to believe that his money made him superior to everyone around him, Vincent had never learned the difference between respect and fear. At 52, he was a man who fired employees for using the wrong font in emails, who screamed at waiters when his steak wasn't perfect, who believed that his bank account was a measuring stick for human worth. His current mood was particularly foul because this trip represented everything he'd worked for. The London deal was supposed to be his masterstroke of property acquisition that would move him from the millionaire bracket to the untouchable billionaire class. He'd spent months courting investors, navigating regulatory hurdles, and positioning himself for this moment. The last thing he wanted was his victory celebration disrupted by, in his words, unsuitable company. Dr. Samuel Rivers, the target of Vincent's hatred, represented everything Vincent feared and misunderstood. Where Vincent was loud and demanding, Dr. Rivers was quiet and confident. Where Vincent used his wealth as a weapon, Dr. Rivers carried himself with the dignity of a man whose worth came from his character, not his bank account. But there was more to Dr. Rivers than met the eye. Much more. 36 years ago, when Samuel Rivers was 12 years old, he'd walked into a restaurant in Birmingham, Alabama with his grandfather. They'd been dressed in their Sunday best, had money to pay for their meal, and had done nothing wrong except exist while black in a place that didn't welcome them. "We don't serve your kind here," the manager had said loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "Try the place down the street." Young Samuel had watched his grandfather's shoulders sag, had seen the defeat in his eyes, had felt the shame burn in his own chest. That night, his grandfather had sat him down and said, "Sammy, the world's going to try to make you small. Don't you let it. You get so successful, so undeniable, that they can't ignore you anymore." It was advice that shaped the rest of Samuel's life. He'd studied obsessively, earned a full scholarship to Harvard Medical School, and become one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the world. He'd performed over 3,000 heart surgeries, pioneered new techniques that saved countless lives, and built a medical empire that few people knew about. Dr. Samuel Rivers wasn't just a doctor. He was the chairman and founder of Riverstone Medical Group, a company that owned hospitals, research facilities, and medical patents worth over $2 billion. His organization had partnerships with airlines, hotels, and corporations around the world. He was traveling to London not as a passenger, but as the keynote speaker at the International Cardiac Surgery Summit, where world leaders would gather to hear his insights on the future of medicine. But Vincent Blackwell saw none of that. He saw only skin color and made assumptions based on ignorance and prejudice. The flight attendant approaching their row was Maria Santos, a 35-year-old woman who'd spent 15 years dealing with difficult passengers. Born in Phoenix to Mexican immigrants, Maria had worked her way up from ground crew to senior flight attendant through sheer determination and professionalism. She had dark hair pulled back in a perfect bun, kind but no-nonsense eyes, and the kind of steady demeanor that came from years of diffusing tense situations at 35,000 feet. Maria had heard Vincent's outburst from the galley and was already calculating her response. She'd dealt with drunk passengers, nervous flyers, and entitled businessmen, but open racism was something else entirely. This wasn't just a customer service issue. This was a federal violation, a safety concern, and a moral crisis, all rolled into one. Behind her came Dylan Torres, a 28-year-old tech entrepreneur from Austin who'd been upgrading to first class when he heard the commotion. Dylan had built a social media app that helped small businesses connect with customers, and his instinct for capturing important moments was already kicking in. His phone was discreetly recording from seat 3A, and he was already calculating how quickly this video could go viral. In seat 4B sat Emma Rodriguez, a travel blogger from Denver whose sharp instincts for newsworthy events were already tingling. Emma had covered social justice issues before becoming a travel writer, and she recognized the significance of what was happening. Her fingers were already flying over her phone, crafting the Twitter thread that would help make this incident international news. Even passengers in economy were starting to pay attention. Lucas Thompson, a 23-year-old college student returning to London for his semester abroad, had heard Vincent's raised voice and was craning his neck to see what was happening. Luke came from a working-class family in Ohio and had saved for months to afford this trip. The idea that someone would be treated differently based on their race in a space he could barely afford to be in himself made his blood boil. But the most important person in this drama hadn't appeared yet. Captain James Mitchell was still in the cockpit reviewing flight plans and weather reports, unaware that his evening was about to become a defining moment in his career. At 45, Captain Mitchell was a former Navy pilot who'd flown missions in Afghanistan before transitioning to commercial aviation. He was a man who believed in honor integrity and the idea that doing the right thing was more important than doing the easy thing. In just a few minutes, Captain Mitchell would be forced to make a choice that would cost an airline thousands of dollars, strand hundreds of passengers, and turn him into an unlikely hero for millions of people around the world. But first, the situation in first class needed to escalate beyond the point of no return. Vincent Blackwell was just getting started. Maria Santos approached row 2 with the practiced smile of a professional who'd diffused 1,000 conflicts. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel that suggested she wasn't someone to underestimate. "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Maria, your senior flight attendant. Is there something I can help you with?" Vincent wheeled around to face her, his face flushed red with indignation. "Yes, there absolutely is something you can help me with. There's been a seating error. This man," he jabbed his finger toward Dr. Rivers again, "is clearly in the wrong section." "Doctor." Rivers looked up from his medical journal for the first time since Vincent's outburst. His voice was quiet, measured with the kind of authority that comes from years of making life and death decisions. "I believe my seat assignment is correct. 2A, if I'm not mistaken." "Don't be ridiculous," Vincent snapped. "First class is for premium passengers, people who've earned the right to be here, people who understand proper behavior and social standards." Maria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. In her 15 years of flying, she'd developed a sixth sense for trouble, and every instinct was screaming that this situation was about to explode. "Sir, may I see both of your boarding passes, please?" Dr. Rivers calmly reached into his jacket pocket and produced his boarding pass. The paper was slightly wrinkled from travel, but the seat assignment was clear 2A first class. Vincent snatched his own pass from his breast pocket and thrust it at Maria with the kind of aggressive gesture that suggested he'd never been denied anything in his life. "Vincent Blackwell, seat 2B. Maria read aloud. "And Dr. Rivers, seat 2A. Both valid first-class tickets." She looked between the two men with professional neutrality. "I'm not seeing any seating error, Mr. Blackwell." Vincent's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Then there's been a mistake at booking. I specifically requested suitable surroundings. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've been flying with this airline for 12 years. I know the kind of passengers who belong in first class, and this isn't it." The coded language wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Dylan Torres felt his phone grow warm in his hand as he continued recording. Emma Rodriguez paused her typing to stare at the unfolding drama. Even Lucas Thompson in economy had stood up to get a better view, his young face twisted with disgust at Vincent's barely concealed racism. Dr. Rivers remained perfectly calm. He folded his boarding pass neatly and returned it to his pocket. "Mr. Blackwell, I understand travel can be stressful. Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable if you spoke with the gate agent about alternative arrangements." The suggestion was reasonable, polite, and completely infuriating to Vincent. In his world, he didn't make accommodations for other people. Other people made accommodations for him. Alternative arrangements. Vincent's voice rose another octave. "I'm not the one who needs alternative arrangements. I paid $8,000 for peace quiet, and the kind of experience that befits someone of my status. What I didn't pay for was to be seated next to someone who clearly doesn't understand the expectations of first-class travel." "And what expectations are those exactly, Doctor?" Rivers asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a trap. Vincent opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to realize he was walking into dangerous territory. He couldn't say what he really meant, that he expected first class to be free of black passengers, without crossing a line that even his privilege couldn't protect him from. Instead, he turned back to Maria with renewed aggression. "I want to speak to your supervisor. I want to speak to the captain. This is unacceptable, and I refuse to tolerate it." Maria had been hoping to de-escalate the situation quietly, but Vincent's demands had just made that impossible. "Mr. Blackwell, both passengers have valid tickets for their assigned seats. I can certainly speak with the purser about upgrade options if any other seats become available, but I can't force a passenger to move from their assigned seat without cause." "Without cause?" Vincent's voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm giving you cause. I'm telling you I'm uncomfortable. I'm telling you this doesn't meet my standards. I'm telling you I require a different arrangement." Dr. Rivers spoke without looking up from his journal. "Comfort is subjective, Mr. Blackwell. Some people find diversity uncomfortable. Others find ignorance unbearable." The comment hit Vincent like a slap across the face. No one spoke to him that way. No one challenged him that way. No one had the audacity to suggest that his discomfort was based on prejudice rather than legitimate concerns about standards and appropriate behavior. "Ignorance," Vincent sputtered. "How dare you? Do you have any idea who I am? I'm Vincent Blackwell. I own Blackwell Properties. I'm closing a $500 million deal in London tomorrow. I create jobs. I contribute to society. I have every right to expect a certain level of service when I pay premium prices." "And what level of service are you expecting exactly, Doctor?" Rivers asked again, his voice still maddeningly calm. Vincent felt like he was being led into a corner by a master chess player, but his anger overrode his caution. "I expect to be surrounded by people who belong in first class, people who understand proper decorum, people who share similar backgrounds and values." "Similar backgrounds," Dr. Rivers repeated thoughtfully. "That's an interesting phrase. Could you elaborate on what backgrounds you consider appropriate for first-class travel?" Maria watched the exchange with growing alarm. She'd seen enough workplace discrimination training to recognize where this conversation was heading, and she knew that once Vincent crossed that line, there would be no going back. "Mr. Blackwell," she interrupted, "perhaps we could continue this conversation privately." "I'd be happy to." "No," Vincent snapped. "I want this resolved now, publicly, so everyone understands the standards we're maintaining here." He turned back to Dr. Rivers with renewed fury. "You want to know what backgrounds I consider appropriate? Backgrounds of education success and social responsibility. Backgrounds that involve contributing to society rather than taking from it. Backgrounds that understand the difference between earned privilege and misplaced entitlement." Dr. Rivers finally looked up from his journal, his brown eyes meeting Vincent's blue ones directly. "That's a fascinating perspective, Mr. Blackwell. Tell me what specific contributions to society qualify someone for first-class travel? What educational achievements? What measures of success?" Vincent felt like he was being examined under a microscope, and he didn't like it. "Common sense qualifies someone," he shot back. "The ability to afford an $8,000 ticket. The wisdom to understand social hierarchies and respect them." "Social hierarchies," Dr. Rivers repeated. "Based on what criteria?" And that's when Vincent Blackwell, real estate mogul and self-appointed guardian of social standards, decided to say exactly what he meant: consequences be damned. "You really want to know?" Vincent's voice had taken on a dangerous edge, the kind of tone that preceded the worst decisions of his life. "Fine. Let me explain social hierarchies to you in terms even you can understand." The first-class cabin had become a theater, with every passenger now openly staring at the drama unfolding in row 2. Dylan Torres adjusted his phone's angle to capture both men clearly, while Emma Rodriguez's fingers flew across her screen, live tweeting the confrontation to her 50,000 followers with hashtags that would soon trend worldwide. Maria Santos felt her stomach drop as she recognized the signs of a passenger about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Mr. Blackwell, I really think we should." "Don't interrupt me," Vincent snapped at her, his entitled fury now expanding to include everyone around him. "I'm trying to educate someone who clearly doesn't understand his place in the world." Dr. Rivers closed his medical journal slowly, and gave Vincent his full attention for the first time since the confrontation began. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that filled operating rooms when lives hung in the balance. "Please, Mr. Blackwell, educate me." Vincent took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and delivered what he believed would be a masterclass in social reality. Social hierarchies are based on achievement, contribution, and merit. They're based on who builds things versus who destroys them, who creates wealth versus who consumes it, who earns their place versus who expects handouts. "Interesting theory," Dr. Rivers replied. "And how do you determine who falls into which category?" "By looking at results," Vincent declared, spreading his arms wide as if the answer were obvious. "I've built a $300 million company from nothing. I employ hundreds of people. I pay millions in taxes. I contribute to charities and political campaigns that shape policy. When I walk into a room, people listen because I've earned that respect through success." "And what about me?" Dr. Rivers asked quietly. "What category do you place me in?" Vincent looked at him with undisguised contempt. You're traveling alone with a worn-out bag and no visible signs of success. You're wearing a jacket that's seen better days. You're reading instead of conducting business. Everything about you screams ordinary." The insult hung in the air like poison gas. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Lucas Thompson, the college student from economy, had moved closer to first class and was now standing in the aisle, his face burning with second-hand embarrassment and anger. Dr. Rivers nodded thoughtfully, as if Vincent had just presented an interesting medical case rather than a character assassination. "So your assessment of my worth is based on my appearance and your assumptions about my circumstances. My assessment is based on pattern recognition," Vincent replied smugly. "I've been successful for 30 years because I can read people. I can identify winners and losers, contributors and takers, people who belong and people who don't. And people who don't belong should sit where exactly," Vincent gestured toward the back of the plane with a dismissive wave. "Wherever they can afford to sit based on their actual achievements, rather than whatever diversity program or charity case got them upgraded." The accusation hit like a thunderbolt. Vincent had just publicly suggested that the only way a black man could afford first class was through charity or special programs, essentially declaring that black success was inherently illegitimate. Emma Rodriguez stopped typing mid-sentence, her mouth falling open. Dylan Torres felt his hands shake slightly as he held his phone steady, realizing he was capturing something that would change multiple lives forever. Maria Santos took a step back, her professional composure finally cracking as she realized this had moved far beyond a seating dispute. Dr. Rivers studied Vincent with the kind of clinical detachment he usually reserved for examining X-rays and test results. "So, in your worldview, my presence in first class is automatically suspicious because it challenges your assumptions about who deserves success. Your presence here is suspicious because nothing about you suggests you can afford to be here legitimately," Vincent shot back. "And frankly, I resent having to share space I paid for with someone who's probably here through some quota system or bleeding heart airline policy." The racism was now explicit and undeniable. Vincent had crossed the line from coded language to overt discrimination, and he'd done it in front of dozens of witnesses with multiple cameras recording every word. Lucas Thompson couldn't contain himself any longer. "Dude, what is wrong with you?" he called out from the aisle. "You don't know anything about this man." Vincent spun around to face the young college student with fury. "Stay out of this, kid. This is a conversation between adults who understand how the real world works." "The real world doesn't work like this," Lucas replied, his voice shaking with anger. "The real world moved past this garbage decades ago." Did it? Vincent laughed bitterly. Then explain to me why every major corporation has diversity quotas. Explain affirmative action policies. Explain why we have to lower standards to accommodate people who can't meet them naturally. The real world is full of artificial elevation, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. Dr. Rivers raised his hand slightly, a gesture so subtle and commanding that both Vincent and Lucas immediately fell silent. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, but there was something new underneath it. A hint of steel that suggested depths Vincent couldn't imagine. Mr. Blackwell, you've made several interesting assumptions about me tonight. You've assumed I don't belong here. You've assumed I didn't earn my seat. You've assumed my success, if any, is artificial rather than merit-based. You've essentially assumed that my race disqualifies me from legitimate achievement. I didn't say anything about race, Vincent protested, though his face had gone pale as he realized how his words might sound on recording. You didn't have to, Dr. Rivers replied. Your meaning was quite clear, but I'm curious about something. In your assessment of my unworthiness, did you consider the possibility that your assumptions might be incorrect? Vincent's confidence wavered for the first time since the confrontation began. Something in Dr. Rivers' tone suggested this wasn't just a philosophical question. What do you mean? Dr. Rivers reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small leather wallet. From it, he produced a business card and handed it to Vincent without ceremony. Vincent looked at the card and his face went completely white. The card read, Dr. Samuel Rivers, M.D., Ph.D., F.A.C.S. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Riverstone Medical Group. Vincent stared at the card like it was written in a foreign language. Riverstone Medical Group. The name was familiar, but he couldn't place it. Something was nagging at the back of his mind, something important, something that made his stomach start to churn with the first hints of genuine fear. I don't understand, Vincent said, his voice suddenly much smaller than it had been moments before. Dr. Rivers smiled for the first time since boarding the plane. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a chess master gives when announcing checkmate. You will, he said quietly. Very soon. Vincent stared at the business card in his hands as if it might spontaneously combust. The elegant lettering seemed to swim before his eyes. Dr. Samuel Rivers, M.D., Ph.D., F.A.C.S. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Riverstone Medical Group. Riverstone Medical Group. The name triggered something in his memory, but the connection remained frustratingly elusive. His mind was too clouded with anger and embarrassment to think clearly. I don't care what your business card says, Vincent declared, his voice rising to carry across the entire first-class section. Anyone can print a fancy card. That doesn't change the fundamental reality of what's happening here. Doctor, Rivers leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. And what reality is that Mr. Blackwell Vincent felt the eyes of every passenger boring into him. He was committed now too deep to back down without losing face completely. In his twisted worldview, retreat would be an admission of weakness, and Vincent Blackwell had never shown weakness in his life. The reality, he said, his voice dripping with venom, is that I paid $8,000 for a first-class experience. I paid for comfort, for exclusivity, for the kind of environment where I can conduct business with people who share my values and standards. And what values are those? Dr. Rivers asked, his tone as calm as if he were discussing the weather. Vincent's face had turned a mottled purple, a combination of rage and the growing realization that this conversation wasn't going the way he'd expected. But he was too arrogant to recognize the trap being laid for him. Traditional values, he spat, merit-based values. The understanding that success comes from hard work and intelligence, not from government programs and social engineering. The recognition that some people earn their place in the world while others have it handed to them. Maria Santos had called for backup and was now joined by Robert Chen, the purser, a calm man in his 40s who'd dealt with every kind of passenger crisis imaginable. They stood a few feet away, their professional smiles masking their growing alarm at Vincent's increasingly explicit language. Dylan Torres continued filming his social media instincts, telling him this was about to become a viral sensation. His initial post had already garnered hundreds of shares, and the comments were pouring in from viewers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Emma Rodriguez had stopped live tweeting to focus entirely on the confrontation. As a journalist, she recognized she was witnessing something significant, not just a racist outburst, but the kind of public self-destruction that would have lasting consequences. Vincent looked around the cabin and saw all the phones pointed at him, all the shocked faces staring at him. Instead of feeling shame or concern, he felt validation. These people needed to hear what he had to say. They needed to understand the truth about social hierarchies and proper order. "You want to know the real problem?" Vincent continued, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "The real problem is that we've lost the ability to speak honestly about observable differences. We've become so politically correct, so terrified of offending anyone that we can't acknowledge obvious realities." "What realities?" Dr. Rivers asked, his voice still infuriatingly calm. Vincent took a deep breath and decided to say exactly what he meant. "The reality that some cultures value education and hard work while others make excuses. The reality that some communities build wealth and stability while others remain dependent on government assistance. The reality that statistical differences in achievement aren't accidents. They're patterns that reflect deeper truths about character and capability." The racist rhetoric was now fully explicit. Vincent had moved from coded language to outright racial stereotyping, and he was doing it in front of dozens of witnesses with multiple cameras recording. Dr. Rivers listened to the entire rant without expression, then asked a simple question. "And which category do you believe I represent, Mr. Blackwell?" Vincent looked at him with undisguised contempt. "I think you represent someone who's benefited from lowered standards and artificial elevation. I think you represent the kind of diversity hire that corporations use to meet quotas rather than merit requirements. And I think your presence in first class is a perfect example of how these policies have corrupted what should be merit-based systems." The cabin fell into absolute silence. Vincent had just explicitly stated that he believed Dr. Rivers was unqualified for success because of his race, that his achievements were illegitimate, and that his presence in first class was the result of racial preferences rather than personal accomplishment. Lucas Thompson couldn't contain himself. "Are you listening to yourself?" he shouted from the aisle. "You're literally saying black people can't earn success. That's straight-up racism, man." Vincent whirled around to face the young college student. "I'm saying that when standards are lowered to accommodate certain groups, it devalues achievement for everyone. When medical schools admit students with lower test scores because of race, when businesses promote employees based on diversity rather than performance, when airlines upgrade passengers for social justice rather than loyalty status. Yes, that undermines merit-based systems." Dr. Rivers finally spoke, and his voice carried a new edge that made several passengers lean forward. "Mr. Blackwell, you've made some very specific assumptions about medical school admissions, business promotions, and airline policies. You seem quite confident in your assessment of how these systems work." "I know how the world works," Vincent declared. "I've been successful for 30 years because I understand reality instead of living in some fantasy where everyone is equal and all cultures produce identical outcomes." "Fascinating perspective," Dr. Rivers said. "Tell me, in your expert opinion, what medical school do you believe would lower its standards to admit an unqualified black student?" Vincent sensed this was a trap, but his arrogance overrode his caution. "Any of them. Harvard, Yale, Johns Hopkins. They all have diversity quotas that prioritize race over test scores. Dr. Rivers nodded thoughtfully. And what test scores do you consider inadequate for medical school admission? Below the traditional standards, Vincent said, vaguely realizing too late that he was being led somewhere dangerous, which are, Vincent was now sweating despite the cabin's cool air conditioning. Look, I'm not going to stand here and debate educational policy with you. The bottom line is simple. I paid for a premium experience, and your presence here compromises that experience. I want to be moved to a different seat, or I want you moved to a different seat. One of us needs to go. Dr. Rivers stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding with the kind of controlled grace that comes from years of performing delicate surgery. When he reached his full height, he looked down at Vincent with an expression that was both pitying and profoundly disappointed. "Mr. Blackwell," he said quietly, "I'm afraid there's been a significant misunderstanding tonight. But don't worry. It's about to be cleared up." The call from the purser came over the intercom in a tone that Captain James Mitchell had heard only a handful of times in his 20-year career. "Captain Mitchell, to the cabin, please. Priority passenger situation." Captain Mitchell was reviewing the final weather reports for their transatlantic route when the call came through. At 45, he was a man who'd learned to trust his instincts during 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Something about Robert's voice told him this wasn't a routine complaint about service or seating. He finished his pre-flight checklist with practiced efficiency, then stood and straightened his uniform. 4 gold stripes gleamed on his shoulders, each one representing years of experience, responsibility, and the kind of moral authority that comes from commanding aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars while carrying hundreds of lives. Captain Mitchell was not a man who tolerated nonsense. He'd grown up in rural Montana, the son of a rancher who'd taught him that a man's worth was measured by his character, not his bank account. His military service had reinforced those values, showing him how people from every background could serve with honor when given the chance. As he walked through the galley toward first class, he could hear raised voices echoing from the cabin. The tone was angry, aggressive, and completely inappropriate for a confined space filled with passengers preparing for an overnight flight. Maria Santos met him at the entrance to first class, her usually perfect composure showing cracks of stress and concern. "Captain, we have a situation in row 2. Mr. Blackwell has been making inappropriate comments to his seatmate." What kind of inappropriate comments, Captain Mitchell asked, though the tension in Maria's voice already suggested the answer. "Racial comments, sir. Explicit discrimination. He's demanded that we remove the other passenger based solely on race. Multiple passengers are recording, and it's already going viral on social media." Captain Mitchell felt his jaw tighten. In his years of flying, he'd dealt with drunk passengers, unruly customers, and every variety of human behavior imaginable. But racism was different. Racism wasn't just a customer service issue. It was a safety issue, a legal issue, and a moral issue that went to the core of what he believed about human dignity. "Where are they now?" he asked. "Row 2. Mr. Blackwell is still making demands, and Dr. Rivers, the other passenger, is handling it with remarkable grace. But the situation is escalating." Captain Mitchell nodded grimly and walked into first class. What he saw there made his blood run cold. Vincent Blackwell stood in the aisle, his face flushed and sweaty, gesturing aggressively while a dozen phones recorded his every word. Seated calmly in 2A was a distinguished black man reading a medical journal, his posture radiating the kind of quiet dignity that reminded Captain Mitchell of some of the finest officers he'd served with overseas. The contrast was stark and telling. Vincent looked like a man having a public breakdown, while Dr. Rivers appeared to be the only calm person in the entire section. "Gentlemen," Captain Mitchell said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in first class immediately fall silent. "I'm Captain Mitchell. I understand we have a seating concern." Vincent's face lit up with relief. Finally, someone with real authority had arrived, someone who would surely understand the situation from his perspective. "Captain, thank God you're here," Vincent gushed. "I've been trying to explain to your staff that there's been a seating error. This man," he pointed at Dr. Rivers, "clearly doesn't belong in first class. I've paid premium prices for a premium experience, and I expect the airline to maintain appropriate standards." Captain Mitchell looked at Vincent, then at Dr. Rivers, then back at Vincent. His expression revealed nothing, but inside he was already calculating options and consequences. "Mr. Blackwell, Vincent Blackwell, I'm a Platinum Elite member. I fly first class exclusively, and I've never had to deal with anything like this before. Mr. Blackwell, what exactly is your concern with this passenger seat assignment?" Vincent hesitated for just a moment, sensing that his answer would be crucial. "My concern is that first class should be reserved for passengers who meet certain criteria. Standards of behavior, social compatibility, the kind of environment that justifies the premium pricing." Captain Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly. "And this passenger doesn't meet those criteria because it's obvious he doesn't belong here," Vincent said, his frustration boiling over again. "Look at him. Look at his clothes, his bag, his whole presentation. Does he look like someone who can afford an $8,000 ticket? Does he look like the kind of person who understands first-class protocols and expectations?" Dr. Rivers looked up from his journal for the first time since the captain's arrival. "Captain Mitchell, I apologize for the disturbance. I had hoped we could resolve this quietly, but Mr. Blackwell seems determined to make this a public matter." Captain Mitchell studied Dr. Rivers carefully. There was something about the man's bearing, his voice, his calm authority that struck him as familiar. This wasn't someone who'd been randomly upgraded or given a charity ticket. This was someone who belonged exactly where he was sitting. "Dr. Rivers, is it?" Captain Mitchell asked. "That's correct. And your seat assignment is 2A. Dr. Rivers reached into his pocket and handed over his boarding pass without ceremony. Captain Mitchell examined it carefully, noting not just the seat assignment, but the ticket class and fare code that indicated this was a full-price last-minute purchase. "Everything appears to be in order," Captain Mitchell said, handing the boarding pass back. Vincent's face turned purple. "That's not the point. The point is that I specifically requested suitable surroundings when I booked this flight. I was assured that first-class passengers would meet certain standards of compatibility." "Compatibility," Captain Mitchell repeated slowly. "Based on what criteria, Mr. Blackwell?" And that's when Vincent Blackwell, real estate mogul and self-appointed arbiter of social hierarchies, made the decision that would destroy his life. Based on the obvious criteria, he snapped. "Based on race, if you want me to be completely honest. I don't fly with black people. I don't trust them. I don't feel safe around them, and I certainly don't want to spend 8 hours sitting next to one. If that makes me a racist, then fine. I'm a racist. But I'm a paying customer, and I demand appropriate accommodation." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every passenger in first class stared at Vincent in shocked silence. Dylan Torres felt his phone grow hot in his hands as his live stream exploded with viewers sharing the clip in real time. Emma Rodriguez stopped typing altogether, her journalist instincts telling her she was witnessing something that would make international news. Captain Mitchell looked at Vincent Blackwell for a long moment, his face completely expressionless. Then he looked at Dr. Rivers, who met his gaze with calm, sad eyes that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd encountered such hatred. Finally, Captain Mitchell spoke, and his words would soon be quoted in newspapers around the world. "Mr. Blackwell, in 30 years of flying, I have never heard a passenger express such blatant, unapologetic racism on one of my aircraft. And I need you to understand something very clearly. This is my aircraft. These are my passengers. And on my aircraft, every passenger is treated with equal dignity and respect regardless of the color of their skin. Vincent's confident smirk began to fade as he realized the captain wasn't responding the way he'd expected. Now Captain Mitchell continued, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to apologize to Dr. Rivers and take your seat quietly. If you refuse, I will have you removed from this aircraft and banned from this airline permanently." Vincent laughed, a harsh sound that betrayed his growing nervousness. "You can't do that. I'm a paying customer. I have rights." Captain Mitchell reached up and slowly removed his captain's hat. The gesture was simple, but it carried enormous weight. In 30 years of flying, he had never walked away from a flight. He had never abandoned his post or his passengers. But he was about to. Captain Mitchell tucked his hat under his arm and looked out over the first-class cabin with the kind of solemn authority that had once commanded fighter jets in war zones. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to every passenger on the aircraft, and beyond that, thanks to Dylan Torres's live stream, to hundreds of thousands of viewers around the world. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mitchell speaking." The formal announcement tone made every passenger sit up straighter. "I regret to inform you that I am removing myself from duty as pilot in command of this flight." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Vincent's smug expression cracked like thin ice. "What are you talking about?" Vincent sputtered. "You can't just abandon your flight because of a seating dispute." Captain Mitchell turned to face him directly. "Mr. Blackwell, this isn't a seating dispute. This is a hate incident, and I will not pilot an aircraft where passengers are subjected to racial harassment and discrimination." "That's insane," Vincent protested, his voice rising to a panicked pitch. "I'm the victim here. I'm the one being forced to accept substandard conditions. You work for me. I'm the customer." "No, Mr. Blackwell," Captain Mitchell replied with steel in his voice. "I work for every passenger on this aircraft equally. I work for the safety and dignity of 180 human beings who trusted me to get them to London safely. And I cannot in good conscience operate this aircraft while you remain aboard making terrorist threats against fellow passengers." Terrorist threats. Vincent's face went white. "I never made any threats." "You stated that you don't feel safe around black people," Captain Mitchell continued calmly. "You've created a hostile environment based on race. You've disrupted the peace and safety of this cabin through hate speech. Under federal aviation regulations, that constitutes a security threat." Dr. Rivers had closed his medical journal and was watching the exchange with the kind of clinical attention he usually reserved for complex surgical procedures. His expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes, a recognition of moral courage that he'd rarely witnessed. Emma Rodriguez was typing frantically, her Twitter thread gaining thousands of retweets per minute as the story spread across social media platforms. Hashtag Captain Mitchell was already trending with users praising his principled stand and sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination. Dylan Torres's live stream had exploded to over 100,000 concurrent viewers, with comments pouring in so fast the text was a blur. News outlets were already reaching out to his production company requesting licensing rights to the footage. "This is ridiculous," Vincent declared, looking around the cabin for support that wasn't coming. "You're all being manipulated by political correctness. You're destroying the standards that make first class worth paying for." Lucas Thompson, the college student from economy, had moved close enough to hear everything. "Dude, the only thing being destroyed here is your reputation, and you're doing it to yourself." Vincent spun around to face him. "Stay out of this, kid. This is between adults who understand how the real world works." "The real world doesn't work like this anymore," Lucas shot back. "Maybe in your grandfather's time, but not now. Now this kind of garbage gets you fired, divorced, and banned from every decent place in the country." Captain Mitchell raised his hand, and the cabin fell silent. "Mr. Blackwell, you have 30 seconds to make a choice. You can apologize to Dr. Rivers, take your seat, and we can proceed to London. Or you can continue this behavior, and I will walk off this aircraft and ensure that you are criminally charged for disrupting a federal flight." Vincent's mind raced. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. He was the customer. He was the one paying premium prices. The captain was supposed to accommodate him, not threaten him. "You're bluffing," Vincent said, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. "You can't just abandon a flight. You'll be fired. The airline will sue you. You'll lose your pension." Captain Mitchell smiled grimly. "Mr. Blackwell, I spent 2 tours in Afghanistan defending the principle that all Americans deserve equal treatment under the law. I'm not about to compromise that principle now for the convenience of a bigot in a business suit." He turned to address the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand what's happening here. This isn't about political correctness or social engineering. This is about basic human decency. This is about whether we allow hatred and discrimination to flourish in spaces where we're all trapped together." Vincent felt the walls closing in around him. Every eye in first class was staring at him with undisguised disgust. The phones were still recording. His words were being broadcast live to the world. "Fine," he snapped, his voice shrill with desperation. "I'll apologize." "There. Are you happy I apologize for expressing my honest feelings about airline security and passenger compatibility?" The non-apology hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Rivers looked up at Vincent with an expression of profound sadness. "Mr. Blackwell," Dr. Rivers said quietly, "an apology requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing and genuine remorse. What you just offered was neither." Vincent's last thread of self-control snapped. "You want genuine, I'll give you genuine. I genuinely believe that forced integration has ruined air travel, just like it's ruined education, employment, and every other institution in this country. I genuinely believe that some people earn their place in the world, while others have it handed to them through government programs and social pressure. And I genuinely believe that my $8,000 ticket entitles me to an environment free from social engineering experiments." The racist rant was now complete and undeniable. Vincent had explicitly endorsed segregation, questioned the legitimacy of black achievement, and framed civil rights as social engineering rather than basic justice. Captain Mitchell looked at him with the kind of expression usually reserved for war criminals and child abusers. Then he turned and began walking toward the cockpit to collect his flight bag. "Where are you going?" Vincent called after him, panic finally creeping into his voice. Captain Mitchell paused at the cockpit door. "I'm going to get a coffee, Mr. Blackwell, and I'll be back when the racist gets off my plane." The moment Captain Mitchell disappeared into the terminal, Vincent's phone began vibrating like an angry hornet. The first call came from his lawyer, Benedict Morrison, a sharp-faced man who'd spent 15 years cleaning up the messes of wealthy clients. "Vincent, what the hell is going on?" Benedict's voice was tight with controlled panic. "I'm getting calls from reporters asking for comment about some airplane incident. Please tell me you haven't done anything stupid." Vincent stepped into an empty gate area, trying to escape the curious stares of other passengers. "It's being blown out of proportion, Ben. I had a simple seating disagreement, and the captain overreacted. I need you to—" Vincent stopped talking. "I'm watching a video of you right now. You're on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and the local news. Did you really say you don't fly with black people?" Vincent felt sweat beading on his forehead. "The video is edited. It's taken out of context. I was expressing legitimate concerns about airline security and passenger screening. Vincent, I've watched the full video. Multiple angles. There's no context that makes this okay. You explicitly endorsed segregation on a commercial aircraft. You questioned the achievements of black Americans. You used language that HR departments fire people for." Through the phone, Vincent could hear typing and the sound of news broadcasts. Benedict was clearly dealing with a media crisis that was exploding in real time. "How bad is it?" Vincent asked, though he was afraid of the answer. "It's catastrophic. The video has 7 million views in 2 hours. Hashtag Vincent Blackwell is trending #1 worldwide. Your company's stock has already dropped 12% in after-hours trading. I've had calls from CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and the BBC. This is international news, Vincent. Vincent felt his legs go weak. He sank into a plastic chair and watched through the gate window as airport police boarded his former aircraft. "Fix it," he whispered into the phone. "Whatever it costs, fix it." "There's no fixing this," Benedict replied. "This isn't a civil lawsuit or a business dispute. This is a public relations nuclear bomb. Your face is now associated with airline racism. Your name is being used as a synonym for bigotry. The only thing I can do is try to minimize the criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" Vincent's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. "Disrupting a commercial flight is a federal crime. Hate speech on federal transportation can be prosecuted under civil rights laws. The FBI takes this stuff seriously, especially when it goes viral." Vincent hung up and immediately called his second-in-command, Janet Price, the COO of Blackwell Properties. Janet had been running day-to-day operations while Vincent focused on the London deal, and her voice was strained with crisis management fatigue. "Vincent, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. We have a situation. I know about the video." "It's not just the video anymore," Janet interrupted. "It's everything. The London investors called an emergency meeting. The Kensington Property Group is reconsidering their partnership. 3 of our major lenders want immediate meetings. And Vincent, the board is talking about a vote of no confidence." Vincent felt like he was falling through empty air. "The board works for me. I control the majority shares. You control 42%?" Janet corrected. "The other board members are panicking about their own reputations. They're saying you've become a liability. They're talking about forcing a buyout under the moral turpitude clause in your partnership agreement." The moral turpitude clause. Vincent had insisted on including it in every major contract to protect himself from partners who might embarrass the company. He'd never imagined it would be used against him. "This is temporary," Vincent insisted. "The news cycle moves fast. Something else will happen, and everyone will forget about this." "Vincent, I need you to listen to me very carefully." Janet's voice took on the tone of someone delivering terminal diagnosis. "I just got off the phone with Roger Pemberton at Kensington. Do you know what he told me?" Vincent felt ice forming in his stomach. "What did he say?" He said, and I quote, "We don't do business with racists. The deal is dead effective immediately. They're not just canceling the London acquisition, Vincent. They're blacklisting us from all future projects. The London deal, $500 million, the crowning achievement of his career. Gone." That's impossible," Vincent stammered. "We have contracts. We have exclusivity agreements. They can and they did. The morality clause works both ways, Vincent. They're citing public disrepute and reputational damage as grounds for immediate termination." Vincent's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown London number. Then another. Then another. His email inbox was refreshing so fast it looked like a slot machine. "I have to go," he told Janet. "Handle the board. Explain the situation. Buy me some time." "Vincent, there's no time to buy. This isn't going away. You need to come home and start damage control immediately." But Vincent wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at his phone screen, watching as his Twitter mentions exploded with hate mail, death threats, and promises to boycott every business he'd ever been associated with. Meanwhile, back on Flight 847, Dr. Rivers was making his own phone call. His conversation was much quieter, much calmer, and infinitely more consequential. "Evelyn, it's Samuel," he said to his executive assistant back in Boston. "I need you to monitor a developing situation." "Doctor, I'm already monitoring it," Evelyn Martinez replied. "The video is everywhere. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, but I want you to compile everything. Video footage, social media posts, news coverage, public reactions. Everything that documents tonight's events. For legal purposes, Dr. Rivers looked out the aircraft window at the terminal where Vincent was probably still trying to manage his crisis. For educational purposes, tonight is going to become a case study, Evelyn. Not just in individual prejudice, but in how quickly accountability can reshape someone's entire world. Should I prepare a statement for the press? Not yet. Let the situation develop naturally. But I do want you to reach out to our partners in the airline industry. It's time we had a serious conversation about passenger screening for hate incidents. Screening for hate incidents. Dr. Rivers smiled slightly. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Mr. Blackwell has shown the world exactly who he is. Now we need to ensure he faces appropriate consequences. Through the aircraft's intercom system, an announcement crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Timothy Davis. I regret to inform you that Captain Mitchell has removed himself from duty. Under FAA regulations, this flight cannot proceed without a pilot in command. We are returning to the gate, and this flight is officially canceled. A groan went up from the passengers, but it wasn't directed at the crew. Every eye turned toward the empty space where Vincent Blackwell had been standing, and the mood in the cabin shifted from shock to cold anger. Dylan Torres was still streaming, and his viewer count had topped 500,000. The comments were coming so fast they were unreadable, but the sentiment was clear. Vincent Blackwell had become the most hated man in America in the space of 2 hours. And his day was just getting started. As passengers began gathering their belongings and filing off the canceled flight, Maria Santos approached Dr. Rivers with the kind of professional respect that comes from recognizing true dignity under pressure. Dr. Rivers, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced tonight. In 15 years of flying, I've never seen anything like that level of hatred. Dr. Rivers looked up from carefully packing his medical journals and smiled gently. Maria, may I call you Maria? You have nothing to apologize for. You handled an impossible situation with grace and professionalism. Still, I feel like we should have done something sooner, should have stopped it before it escalated. Sometimes, Dr. Rivers said thoughtfully, people need to reveal their true character completely before the rest of us understand what we're dealing with. Mr. Blackwell did us all a favor by being so explicit about his beliefs. Dylan Torres approached hesitantly, his phone still recording, but held at a respectful distance. Dr. Rivers, I'm Dylan Torres. I've been streaming tonight's events, and I wanted to ask, would you be willing to say something to the people watching? There are over 1 million viewers right now. Dr. Rivers considered for a moment, then nodded. Of course. Dylan raised his phone, and Dr. Rivers looked directly into the camera with the same calm authority he brought to addressing medical conferences around the world. To everyone who witnessed tonight's events, I want you to understand something important. What you saw wasn't just one man's prejudice. It was a window into thinking that still exists in our society. The belief that success and dignity are somehow connected to skin color, that achievements by Black Americans are automatically suspect, that integration is a burden rather than a benefit. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. But I also want you to see the positive examples tonight provided. Captain Mitchell, who risked his career to defend a principle. Maria Santos and the crew who stood up for what's right despite pressure from a demanding customer. And all of you passengers who refuse to let hatred go unchallenged. Emma Rodriguez had approached during the impromptu interview, and she raised her hand like a student in class. Dr. Rivers, can you tell us a little about yourself? Mr. Blackwell made some assumptions about your background and qualifications, Doctor. Rivers smiled, and for the first time all evening there was a hint of steel beneath his gentle demeanor. Certainly. I'm Dr. Samuel Rivers. I'm a cardiac surgeon, which means I spend my days literally holding human hearts in my hands, hearts that pump the same blood regardless of the color of the skin they're wrapped in. Several passengers had gathered around to listen, including Lucas Thompson, the college student who'd defended Dr. Rivers earlier. I graduated from Harvard Medical School. Dr. Rivers continued summa cum laude with the highest scores in my class. I completed my residency at Johns Hopkins, where I was chief resident in cardiovascular surgery. I've performed over 3,000 heart operations in my 20-year career with a success rate that places me in the top 1% of cardiac surgeons worldwide. Dylan Torres felt his jaw drop. This wasn't just any doctor. This was clearly one of the most accomplished surgeons in the country. I've published 47 papers in peer-reviewed medical journals, Dr. Rivers went on. I hold 6 patents for surgical instruments that have revolutionized cardiac care. I've trained over 200 surgeons who now practice around the world. And next week I'll be delivering the keynote address at the International Cardiac Surgery Summit in London, where I'll be presenting research that could save thousands of lives annually. Emma Rodriguez was typing frantically, realizing she was getting an exclusive interview with someone far more significant than she'd initially understood. Dr. Rivers, when Mr. Blackwell suggested you were unqualified for first-class travel, how did that feel? Dr. Rivers was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of lived experience. Emma, I've been dealing with assumptions about my qualifications my entire career. When I was 12 years old, a restaurant manager told my grandfather and me that our kind didn't belong in his establishment. That night, my grandfather told me to get so successful, so undeniable, that people would have to respect my achievements whether they wanted to or not. He gestured toward his worn leather bag. I've carried this same bag for 15 years. It's been with me through medical conferences in 30 countries. It's held research that's saved countless lives. But Mr. Blackwell looked at it and saw only what he expected to see: evidence of unworthiness. Lucas Thompson shook his head in amazement. So when he said you probably got here through some diversity program, he was suggesting that the only way a black man could afford first-class travel was through charity or special accommodations. Dr. Rivers completed the thought. It never occurred to him that I might have earned my seat through the same method he claimed to use: professional success and financial achievement. Maria Santos had been listening with growing amazement. Dr. Rivers, may I ask, what kind of medical work do you do beyond surgery? Dr. Rivers' expression grew more serious. I run a medical group that operates hospitals and research facilities. We focus on cardiac care for underserved communities, but we also work on broader issues of healthcare access and quality improvement. What he didn't mention, what none of them knew yet, was that Riverstone Medical Group was one of the largest private medical organizations in North America, with partnerships that extended far beyond healthcare into transportation, hospitality, and corporate consulting. Dylan Torres was still streaming, and the viewer count had reached 1.2 million. The comments were now filled with people researching Dr. Rivers online, finding his published papers, his medical innovations, his awards and recognition from institutions around the world. Dr. Rivers Dylan asked, "What do you think should happen to Mr. Blackwell?" Dr. Rivers considered the question carefully. I think Mr. Blackwell should face the natural consequences of his choices. When someone reveals themselves to be prejudiced and hateful in public society, has the right to respond appropriately. But I don't wish for his destruction. I wish for his education. He looked directly into the camera again. To Mr. Blackwell, if you're watching this, I want you to understand that your assumptions about me were wrong in every possible way. But more importantly, I want you to understand that your assumptions about any black person's worthiness qualifications or right to equal treatment are wrong. We are not a problem to be solved or a burden to be endured. We are your fellow human beings deserving of the same respect and dignity you expect for yourself. The interview was interrupted by an announcement over the terminal's PA system. Dr. Samuel Rivers to the American Airlines Customer Service Desk, please. Dr. Samuel Rivers. As Dr. Rivers gathered his belongings to respond to the page, none of the people who'd spent the evening with him could have imagined that they'd just been speaking with one of the most powerful men in American healthcare, and that Vincent Blackwell's racist outburst had just destroyed a business relationship worth $500 million. But they were about to find out. The American Airlines customer service desk was buzzing with activity when Dr. Rivers approached. The manager, Patricia Wells, was a 20-year veteran of airline crisis management who'd handled everything from terrorist threats to celebrity meltdowns. But the situation she was dealing with now was unprecedented. Dr. Rivers, I'm Patricia Wells, station manager. First, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced tonight. This is absolutely not reflective of our company's values or standards. I appreciate that, Patricia. I understand these situations are challenging for everyone involved. Patricia glanced at her computer screen, which showed Dr. Rivers' customer profile. What she saw there made her eyes widen slightly. Dr. Rivers, I see here that you're listed as one of our Platinum Executive Partners. I'm not sure what that means exactly. It's a designation I've never seen before. Dr. Rivers smiled gently. It means that my organization has certain business relationships with American Airlines. Perhaps you should call your corporate office and ask them to explain the details. Patricia picked up her secure phone line and dialed the emergency corporate number. Dr. Rivers waited patiently as she spoke in hushed tones to someone in Dallas headquarters. During the call, Patricia's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something approaching panic. When she hung up, her face was pale. Dr. Rivers, I've just been informed that your organization is... She struggled to find the words. Sir, they're flying in the regional vice president to speak with you personally, and they've asked me to provide you with any accommodations you might need while we address tonight's situation. Dr. Rivers nodded calmly. That's very thoughtful, but right now I'm more concerned about Mr. Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell? Patricia looked confused. Sir, Mr. Blackwell was removed from the aircraft for hate speech and disrupting federal transportation. He's facing federal charges. I understand that. But Patricia, there's something you and your corporate office should know about tonight's incident. Mr. Blackwell's actions may have broader consequences than anyone realizes. Dr. Rivers reached into his jacket and withdrew his phone. After a few quick touches, he handed it to Patricia. On the screen was a news article from the London Financial Times with the headline, Kensington Property Group cancels $500 million American deal over racism incident. Patricia read the article with growing alarm. The piece detailed how Vincent Blackwell's airline outburst had led to the immediate cancellation of a massive real estate acquisition, wiping out hundreds of millions in value and destroying business relationships that had taken years to build. I don't understand, Patricia said. How did they find out so quickly? Business moves at the speed of information now, Dr. Rivers explained. Mr. Blackwell's racist statements were broadcast live to millions of people, including business leaders in London who were planning to work with him. They made their decision based on what they saw with their own eyes. Patricia handed the phone back, her hands slightly shaking. Dr. Rivers, the article mentions that the Kensington deal was contingent on approval from something called Riverstone Medical Group. That's my organization, yes. The simple admission hit Patricia like a physical blow. She suddenly understood why corporate headquarters was in crisis mode, why a regional vice president was flying in at midnight, why Dr. Rivers' customer profile had designation codes she'd never seen before. You're not just a doctor, she said quietly. I'm a doctor first and foremost, Dr. Rivers replied. But yes, I also run a business that has partnerships with airlines, hotels, and corporations around the world. A business that takes very seriously the values of dignity, respect, and equal treatment. Dylan Torres, who had been respectfully maintaining his distance, approached with his phone still recording. The live stream was now approaching 2 million viewers, and major news networks were beginning to pick up the story. Dr. Rivers, people are saying online that Mr. Blackwell's company stock has crashed. Is that related to what happened tonight? Dr. Rivers looked directly into the camera. Dylan, when someone reveals themselves to be a bigot in public, there are natural consequences. Investors don't want to be associated with hatred. Business partners don't want their reputations tarnished. Customers don't want to support prejudice. Mr. Blackwell's words tonight weren't just morally wrong. They were economically catastrophic. Patricia's phone rang, and she answered with a shaky voice. American Airlines customer service, Patricia speaking. She listened for a moment, then held the phone out to Dr. Rivers. Sir, it's for you. Corporate headquarters. Dr. Rivers took the phone. This is Dr. Rivers. The voice on the other end belonged to James Morrison, American Airlines Senior Vice President of Corporate Partnerships. Dr. Rivers, this is James Morrison. First, I want to personally apologize for tonight's incident. Second, I want to assure you that Mr. Blackwell has been permanently banned from all American Airlines flights. And third, I need to discuss the implications of tonight's events for our ongoing partnership agreements. What implications are you concerned about? James Dr. Rivers Riverstone Medical Group represents one of our largest corporate partnerships. Your organization books over $50 million in annual travel with us. More importantly, your diversity and inclusion consulting has helped us avoid exactly the kind of incident that happened tonight. I need to know, how does tonight's failure reflect on our relationship? Dr. Rivers was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, James Morrison could probably hear his career hanging in the balance. James, tonight wasn't a failure of your policies or your training. Tonight was one individual choosing to reveal his true character in a public forum. How you respond to that revelation will determine whether this incident strengthens or weakens our partnership. What kind of response are you looking for? Dr. Rivers looked around the terminal at the dozens of passengers who were still filming, still sharing, still making Vincent Blackwell's racism a global news story. I'm looking for leadership, he said simply. I'm looking for a clear statement that hatred has no place in air travel. I'm looking for policies that protect passengers from discrimination. And I'm looking for consequences that make it clear that racism isn't just morally wrong, it's economically unsustainable. Done, James said immediately. All of it, Dr. Rivers. Would you be willing to work with us on developing enhanced anti-discrimination protocols? We want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Dr. Rivers smiled. James, I'd be honored to help. But I should mention, tonight's incident is going to become more than just an airline story. This is going to become a case study in how quickly accountability can reshape someone's entire world. After ending the call, Dr. Rivers returned the phone to Patricia, who was staring at him with something approaching awe. Dr. Rivers, how big is your organization exactly? Big enough to make a difference, he replied diplomatically. But more importantly, it's principled enough to use that size responsibly. Emma Rodriguez had been listening to the entire conversation and was now updating her Twitter thread with information that was sending shockwaves through the business community. Hashtag Vincent Blackwell was trending worldwide, but new hashtags were emerging. Hashtag Dr. Samuel Rivers, hashtag Riverstone Medical, and hashtag Business Accountability. The story was evolving from a simple racism incident to a complex narrative about power consequences and the speed of modern accountability. Vincent Blackwell's world was collapsing in real time, and he had no idea how much worse things were about to get, because Dr. Rivers hadn't revealed the most important part of his identity yet. The part that would make Vincent's London real estate deal seem like pocket change compared to what he was really losing. At 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time, exactly 4 hours after Vincent Blackwell's racist outburst. Dr. Samuel Rivers stood in the VIP lounge at JFK International Airport, surrounded by airline executives, federal transportation officials, and journalists from around the world. His quiet dignity had transformed into something far more powerful, the calm authority of a man who was about to reshape an entire industry. The American Airlines Regional Vice President Sarah Chen had arrived from Dallas with a team of corporate lawyers and crisis management specialists. She sat across from Dr. Rivers at a polished conference table, her expression grave, as she prepared to learn the full extent of tonight's consequences. "Dr. Rivers," she began, "our corporate investigation has revealed that your organization, Riverstone Medical Group, has partnerships that extend far beyond what we initially understood. Could you help us comprehend the scope of what we're dealing with?" Dr. Rivers opened his worn leather messenger bag and withdrew a tablet. With a few touches, he projected a presentation onto the conference room's main screen. The title slide read, "Riverstone Medical Group Partnership Portfolio Overview." "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Rivers said, addressing not just the airline executives but also the streaming audience that Dylan Torres was still broadcasting to, now approaching 3 million viewers worldwide. "I think it's time for complete transparency about tonight's events and their implications." The first slide showed a map of the United States with hundreds of red dots marking Riverstone medical facilities. Riverstone Medical Group operates 127 hospitals and medical facilities across North America. We employ 45,000 healthcare workers and serve over 2 million patients annually. Sarah Chen felt her stomach drop as she began to grasp the magnitude of the organization they were dealing with. The second slide showed a different kind of map, one marking corporate partnerships across multiple industries. But healthcare is only part of our mission. Riverstone has partnerships with 12 major airlines, 15 hotel chains, 8 car rental companies, and over 200 corporations for employee health services and diversity consulting. Dr. Rivers clicked to the next slide, which showed financial figures that made several executives gasp audibly. Our annual partnership spending exceeds $300 million across the transportation and hospitality industries. We book approximately 100,000 flights per year for our staff partners and patients. Emma Rodriguez was typing frantically, realizing she was witnessing the revelation of one of the most powerful private organizations in America, one that had been operating largely below the public radar until tonight. More importantly, Dr. Rivers continued. Riverstone has spent the last 5 years developing something we call the Dignity in Transit Initiative. It's a comprehensive program designed to identify, prevent, and address discrimination in transportation and hospitality. He clicked to a slide showing a sophisticated dashboard interface. We've developed AI-powered monitoring systems that track discrimination incidents across our partner organizations. We analyze complaint patterns, employee behavior, and customer feedback to identify potential problems before they become public relations disasters. Federal Transportation Security Administration Director Patricia Williams, who had joined the meeting via video conference from Washington, leaned forward. "Dr. Rivers, are you saying you have the capability to monitor discrimination incidents across the airline industry in real time?" "We have that capability." "Yes. And beginning tomorrow, we'll be implementing it industry-wide." Dr. Rivers clicked to the next slide, which showed a mobile app interface. "This is Dignity Watch, a platform that allows passengers to report discrimination incidents immediately with geolocation timestamp and video upload capabilities." Dylan Torres's livestream comments exploded as viewers realized they were witnessing the announcement of a technology that could revolutionize accountability in transportation. The app connects directly to our legal team, our corporate partnership managers, and federal civil rights enforcement agencies, Dr. Rivers explained. When an incident like tonight's occurs, it's immediately documented, verified, and escalated to appropriate decision-makers within minutes, rather than days or weeks. Sarah Chen raised her hand like a student in class. Dr. Rivers, what does this mean for airlines that partner with Riverstone? Dr. Rivers smiled, and for the first time all evening there was something almost predatory in his expression. It means that companies that demonstrate consistent commitment to dignity and equal treatment will receive preferential partnership status, increased booking volume, and enhanced consulting services. Companies that fail to maintain appropriate standards will face natural consequences. The threat was politely worded, but absolutely clear. Riverstone had the power to make or break airline partnerships worth hundreds of millions of dollars based on how they handled discrimination. Now, Dr. Rivers continued. Let me explain how tonight's incident specifically affects Mr. Vincent Blackwell and his business interests. He clicked to a slide showing a complex web of corporate relationships. At the center was Blackwell Properties, connected by lines to dozens of other companies. Mr. Blackwell's London real estate acquisition was dependent on financing from Kensington Property Group. Kensington Property Group is owned by Morrison International Holdings. Morrison International Holdings is a subsidiary of... He paused for dramatic effect. Riverstone Global Investments. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Vincent Blackwell hadn't just insulted a random doctor on a plane. He'd hurled racist abuse at the man who ultimately controlled the very business deal that was supposed to crown his career. Emma Rodriguez stopped typing altogether, her journalistic instincts telling her she was witnessing one of the most devastating examples of instant karma in corporate history. Dr. Rivers. Patricia Williams said via video link, "You're telling us that Mr. Blackwell's racist outburst tonight has effectively destroyed his own business deal." "Not destroyed, Doctor," Rivers corrected. "Cancelled. There's a difference. Destruction implies external forces acting upon something. Mr. Blackwell's deal was cancelled because of choices he made, words he spoke, and values he revealed." He clicked to the final slide, which showed a timeline of tonight's events with corporate actions marked in red. At 9:23 p.m., Mr. Blackwell made his first racist comment. At 9:45 p.m., he explicitly endorsed segregation. At 10:15 p.m., Kensington Property Group received video footage of the incident. At 10:32 p.m., they initiated emergency contract termination procedures. At 11:15 p.m., the London deal was officially cancelled, with all associated partnerships dissolved. How much money did Mr. Blackwell lose tonight? Dylan Torres asked, his phone capturing every word for the millions of viewers watching the live stream. Dr. Rivers consulted his tablet. The cancelled London acquisition represents approximately $500 million in lost value. The secondary partnerships that were contingent on that deal add another $200 million in lost potential revenue. Mr. Blackwell's company's stock has dropped 47% in after-hours trading, representing a personal wealth loss of approximately $80 million. The room fell silent as the magnitude of Vincent's self-destruction sank in. But the financial losses, Dr. Rivers continued, are nothing compared to the broader industry changes that will result from tonight's incident. He stood and addressed the camera, directly speaking to the millions of people watching around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed tonight was not just one man's prejudice being exposed. It was a demonstration of how quickly accountability can operate in our connected world. Mr. Blackwell assumed that his wealth and status would protect him from consequences. He assumed that airlines would prioritize his comfort over basic human dignity. He assumed that his racism would be tolerated as long as he was paying premium prices. Dr. Rivers' voice grew stronger, carrying the authority of someone who'd just reshaped an entire industry in a single evening. He was wrong on every count. Beginning tomorrow, Dignity Watch will be available in app stores worldwide. Airlines, hotels, and transportation companies will be held accountable for how they handle discrimination in real time. Passengers will have immediate recourse when they face prejudice, and business leaders will understand that hatred isn't just morally wrong, it's economically unsustainable. The live stream was now being watched by over 5 million people, with major news networks interrupting regular programming to cover the story. Vincent Blackwell had become the unwitting catalyst for the largest civil rights technology initiative in transportation history. Sarah Chen spoke into the silence that followed Dr. Rivers' declaration. Dr. Rivers American Airlines commits to being the first major carrier to implement Dignity Watch across our entire fleet. We want to lead this industry transformation. Dr. Rivers nodded approvingly. Sarah, that's exactly the kind of leadership our partnership requires, and it's exactly what will ensure that tonight's incident becomes the last of its kind, rather than just another viral video that people forget next week. As the meeting concluded and executives began making frantic calls to their corporate headquarters, Dr. Rivers packed his tablet back into his worn leather bag. The same bag that Vincent Blackwell had looked at with such contempt just hours earlier, never realizing it contained the power to destroy his entire world. But Vincent's destruction was only the beginning of the story. The real question was whether his fall would serve as a cautionary tale that prevented future incidents, or just another example of consequences that other bigots would somehow convince themselves wouldn't apply to them. Either way, the transportation industry would never be the same. By midnight, Vincent Blackwell's world had collapsed so completely that he stood in the terminal bathroom staring at his reflection like a man trying to recognize a stranger. His $4,000 suit was wrinkled from stress, sweat, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly, and his eyes held the wild look of someone watching their entire life disintegrate in real time. His phone had become a torture device, buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, former business associates, and family members. The few calls he'd actually answered had delivered progressively worse news with each conversation. The first had been from his wife, Catherine, calling from their Hampton house with a voice like ice water. "Vincent, I'm watching the news. Tell me this isn't real. Catherine, it's being blown out of proportion." "The media is Vincent." Her voice cut through his excuses like a surgical blade. "I watched the video. Multiple videos. I watched you humiliate yourself and our family on international television. I watched you reveal yourself as the kind of person I've somehow convinced myself you weren't for 20 years. Catherine, please. We can work through this. The lawyers will handle the business issues, and once the media moves on, I've filed for divorce," she said simply. "Emergency proceedings, irreconcilable differences, and moral turpitude. The papers are being served tomorrow morning." The line went dead, and Vincent felt the first real spike of panic pierce through his anger and denial. The second call had been from his daughter Jessica, a 24-year-old graduate student at Columbia who'd built her entire identity around social justice activism. "Dad, how could you?" She was crying, which somehow hurt worse than Catherine's cold fury. "My friends are calling me. My professors are asking if I'm related to you. I'm getting death threats because I have your last name." "Jessica, you don't understand the context. There is no context that makes racism okay," she screamed through the phone. "There is no context that makes it acceptable to say you don't fly with black people. Do you have any idea what this does to me, to my work, to everything I've tried to build? Sweetheart, I love you. We can work through." "No, we can't. I'm changing my name legally. I'm not going to be associated with a father who's become a symbol of hatred. Don't call me again until you've figured out how to become a decent human being." Another deadline, another piece of his world crumbling away. The third call had been from his son Michael, 28, who worked in corporate finance in London and had been planning to assist with the very real estate deal that Vincent's racism had just destroyed. "Dad, the London deal is dead. Completely dead. But that's not even the worst part." "What do you mean?" "I mean my firm just put me on administrative leave. They can't have someone named Blackwell working on international deals when Blackwell Properties is now synonymous with racist airline outbursts. My career is over because of what you did tonight." Vincent had tried to respond, but Michael continued with the kind of calm fury that comes from watching your father destroy your life via live stream. "And Dad. The absolute worst part, I agree with them. What you did tonight was disgusting. I'm ashamed to share your DNA. 3 family members, 3 destroyed relationships, 3 more pieces of his identity stripped away in the space of an hour. But the business calls had been even worse. His board of directors had held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove him as CEO effective immediately. The vote had been 6-0, with his own longtime business partner casting the deciding ballot. "Vincent, you've become radioactive," Roger Pemberton had explained. "Every company we've ever worked with is cutting ties. Every investor is demanding their money back. Every client is canceling contracts. You've destroyed 40 years of reputation building in a single evening. Roger, you can't do this. I built this company from nothing. I am this company. You were this company," Roger corrected. "Now you're a liability we can't afford to carry. Security will box up your office tonight. Don't come in tomorrow." Vincent had screamed threats about lawsuits and shareholder rights, but Roger had simply hung up. His lawyer, Benedict Morrison, had called next with news that was somehow even worse than losing his company. "Vincent, the FBI is opening a formal investigation into tonight's incident. Hate crimes on federal transportation fall under their jurisdiction, and this case has attracted attention from the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department." What does that mean? It means you could be facing federal criminal charges. It means this isn't just about civil lawsuits and business consequences anymore. You could go to prison. Vincent had laughed hysterically at that, assuming Benedict was exaggerating for dramatic effect. But the lawyer's tone remained deadly serious. "Vincent, the video has been watched by over 10 million people. It's being discussed in Congress. Civil rights organizations are demanding prosecution. The NAACP has issued a statement calling for criminal charges. This has become a test case for whether hate speech on airlines will be prosecuted federally. How much time if they proceed with all possible charges? 5 to 7 years. Vincent had hung up on his own lawyer. Now standing in the airport bathroom at 12:30 a.m., he was alone with the wreckage of his life and the growing realization that this wasn't a temporary crisis he could manage his way through. This was permanent destruction. His phone buzzed with a Twitter notification. Against his better judgment, he opened the app and immediately wished he hadn't. Hashtag Vincent Blackwell was trending #1 worldwide with over 2 million tweets. The video of his racist outburst had been viewed 15 million times. His Wikipedia page had been updated to list airplane racist as his primary claim to fame. Someone had created a website called VincentBlackwellIsAracist.com that documented every business he'd ever been involved with so people could boycott them. But worse than the mockery and hatred was the systematic destruction of everything he'd spent his life building. Every company he'd partnered with had issued statements distancing themselves from him. Every charity he'd supported had returned his donations. Every country club and professional organization was voting on his expulsion. Vincent scrolled through tweet after tweet, watching his reputation die. In real time, Vincent Blackwell proves that money can't buy class dignity or basic human decency. Imagine being so racist that you destroy your own $500 million business deal by insulting the man who controls it. Vincent Blackwell's net worth dropped $80 million in 6 hours because he couldn't sit next to a black doctor. That's $13 million per hour of stupidity. The Vincent Blackwell incident proves that racism isn't just morally wrong, it's economically suicidal. Through the bathroom speakers, he could hear airport announcements about Dr. Rivers being escorted to a private VIP area where major news networks were setting up for exclusive interviews. The man Vincent had tried to humiliate was being treated like visiting royalty, while Vincent hid in a bathroom stall trying not to have a complete nervous breakdown. His chest felt tight again, the same crushing sensation he'd experienced earlier. But this time it wasn't just anger. It was the dawning realization that he'd destroyed everything that mattered to him for the sake of expressing prejudices that now seemed pathetically small and stupid. Vincent looked at himself in the mirror one more time. 12 hours ago, he'd been a successful real estate mogul on the verge of the biggest deal of his career. Now he was unemployed, divorced, disowned by his children, facing federal criminal charges, and had become the most hated man in America. All because he couldn't sit next to a black man for 8 hours without revealing himself to be a monster. The irony was so complete, so devastating, that Vincent actually started laughing, a broken, hysterical sound that echoed off the bathroom tiles and made him sound exactly like what he'd become, a man whose hatred had driven him completely insane. 6 months after what the media had dubbed the Flight 847 incident, the consequences of Vincent Blackwell's racist outburst continued to ripple through multiple industries like aftershocks from a massive earthquake. Vincent himself had become a case study in how quickly a successful person could self-destruct in the age of viral accountability. His transformation from millionaire real estate mogul to cautionary tale was so complete that business schools were already using his story in ethics classes. The criminal charges had been the first domino to fall. Federal prosecutors had charged Vincent with interference with a flight crew disrupting federal transportation, and, in a precedent-setting move, committing a federal hate crime on commercial aviation. The hate crime charge was particularly significant because it marked the first time federal prosecutors had used civil rights laws to address discrimination incidents on airplanes. Vincent's trial had been a media circus, with the courtroom packed daily with reporters, civil rights activists, and curious members of the public who wanted to see the airplane racist face justice. His legal defense had been hampered from the start by the existence of multiple high-definition videos that captured every word of his outburst from several angles. Benedict Morrison, Vincent's former lawyer, had resigned from the case after Vincent refused to accept a plea bargain that would have involved public apology, community service, and sensitivity training. Instead, Vincent had insisted on fighting the charges, convinced that his wealth and connections would ultimately protect him. They hadn't. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Vincent had been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation that included mandatory participation in diversity education programs. But the criminal conviction was just one piece of Vincent's comprehensive downfall. His divorce from Catherine had been finalized within 4 months, with the court ruling that his public racist behavior constituted grounds for fault-based divorce under New York's moral turpitude statutes. Catherine had received 60% of their joint assets plus the Hampton house, and both of their Manhattan properties. His children had followed through on their promises to cut him out of their lives. Jessica had legally changed her name to Jessica Warren, using her mother's maiden name. Michael had moved permanently to London and was rebuilding his finance career under a different identity. Neither had spoken to their father since the night of his airline outburst. Blackwell Properties, now called Meridian Real Estate Group, had not only removed Vincent's name, but had pursued him legally for breach of fiduciary duty and damage to the company's reputation. They'd won a $25 million judgment that had forced Vincent to liquidate his remaining assets to pay the settlement. The London real estate deal that had been the catalyst for Vincent's flight to London had become the stuff of business legend. Riverstone Medical Group had not only canceled Vincent's partnership, but had publicly documented the incident as a case study in corporate due diligence and partner vetting. The story was now taught in business schools as an example of how character assessment should be part of high-stakes deal-making. But Vincent's personal destruction was only the beginning of the story's broader impact. Dr. Samuel Rivers had used the incident as a launching pad for the most comprehensive civil rights initiative in transportation history. Dignity Watch, the app he'd announced during his airport press conference, had been downloaded over 50 million times and had documented more than 10,000 discrimination incidents across airlines, hotels, car rental agencies, and other transportation services. The app's impact had been transformative. Airlines that had previously handled discrimination complaints through slow bureaucratic processes were now forced to respond to incidents within hours as videos and reports spread across social media platforms. Companies with poor records found themselves facing organized boycotts, while those that demonstrated genuine commitment to equality saw their customer satisfaction scores and stock prices rise. American Airlines, which had been the first major carrier to fully integrate Dignity Watch into their operations, had become the gold standard for inclusive air travel. Their partnership with Riverstone Medical Group had expanded into a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program that other airlines were struggling to match. The Federal Aviation Administration had implemented new regulations requiring all airlines to have clear anti-discrimination policies and real-time incident reporting systems. Transportation Security Administration guidelines now included specific protocols for handling hate incidents, with federal air marshals receiving enhanced civil rights training. The ripple effects had extended far beyond aviation. Hotels, restaurants, car rental companies, and even retail businesses had begun implementing similar monitoring systems to avoid becoming the next viral discrimination story. Corporate America had collectively learned that in an age of smartphones and social media, racist behavior by customers or employees could destroy businesses overnight. The legislative impact had been equally significant. Congress had passed the Dignity in Transit Act, which made discrimination on federal transportation a specific federal crime with enhanced penalties. The law was informally known as the Vincent Blackwell Act, ensuring that his name would be permanently associated with anti-discrimination legislation. But perhaps the most powerful consequence had been cultural. The phrase, "pulling a Vincent Blackwell," had entered the popular lexicon as a term for someone whose prejudices led to their complete self-destruction. Business leaders, politicians, and public figures now understood that expressing racist views wasn't just morally wrong, it was career suicide. Dr. Rivers himself had become an unlikely celebrity, regularly appearing on news programs and business shows to discuss corporate responsibility and the economics of equality. Time magazine had named him one of the most influential people in America, while Fortune had featured him on their cover with the headline, "The Doctor Who Prescribed Accountability." His medical practice had expanded internationally, with Riverstone Medical Group opening facilities in 12 countries and becoming a global leader in both healthcare and corporate consulting. The incident that was supposed to humiliate him had instead elevated him to a platform where he could advocate for justice on a scale he'd never imagined. Universities were offering courses on the Flight 847 incident as a case study in multiple disciplines: business ethics, civil rights law crisis, management, social media dynamics, and behavioral psychology. Vincent's downfall had become required reading for anyone studying how individual actions could have enormous societal consequences. The most ironic twist was that Vincent's racist assumptions about Dr. Rivers' qualifications had been so spectacularly wrong that they'd become a teaching tool for confronting implicit bias. The man Vincent had assumed was unworthy of first-class travel had turned out to be one of the most accomplished individuals on the entire aircraft. Corporate training programs now used the incident to help employees recognize how their assumptions about others might be not just offensive, but completely inaccurate. The Vincent Blackwell error was being studied in psychology departments as an example of how prejudice could lead to catastrophically poor judgment. As the 6-month anniversary of the incident approached, Vincent himself was beginning his federal prison sentence at a minimum security facility in upstate New York. His fellow inmates included white-collar criminals who'd embezzled millions and politicians who'd been caught in corruption scandals. But none of them had achieved Vincent's level of infamy. He was the only prisoner who'd become famous for destroying his own life on social media while trying to humiliate someone else. And his story was far from over. The Oneida Correctional Facility in upstate New York wasn't the kind of place Vincent Blackwell had ever imagined himself. The minimum security prison housed white-collar criminals, and while it was far from the violent hellscape portrayed in movies, it was still prison, a place where former millionaires wore identical gray uniforms and stood in line for government-issued meals. Vincent's cell was a small, sparse room with a narrow window that looked out over a yard where inmates exercised and attended mandatory counseling sessions. He'd lost 40 pounds during his incarceration, partly from stress and partly from the simple fact that he no longer had access to expensive restaurants and catered business lunches. His daily routine was regulated down to the minute. Wake at 6 a.m. breakfast, at 6:30 work assignment, at 8 a.m. Lunch at 12 p.m. afternoon programming, at 2 p.m. dinner, at 5 p.m., and lights out at 10 p.m. For a man who'd spent his entire adult life controlling his own schedule and commanding others, the rigid structure was both humbling and strangely therapeutic. Vincent's work assignment was in the prison kitchen, where he spent his mornings washing dishes and preparing vegetables alongside other inmates. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now doing the kind of manual labor he'd once considered beneath him, working alongside men from backgrounds he'd never bothered to understand. His supervisor was Marcus Washington, a 45-year-old black man serving time for tax evasion who'd lost his accounting business after getting behind on payments to the IRS. Marcus was patient professional and had no interest in discussing Vincent's infamous past beyond what was necessary for work assignments. Blackwell Marcus would say each morning, "You're on prep duty. Try not to cut yourself with the knives. The paperwork isn't worth it." It had taken Vincent 3 months to work up the courage to ask Marcus the question that had been eating at him since his first day in the kitchen. "Marcus, why don't you hate me? You know what I did? What I said about people like you." Marcus had continued chopping vegetables without looking up. "People like me? You mean accountants? Yeah, I heard what you said about black people, but hating you would be like being angry at a sick person for having symptoms. Sick Vincent, you spent 52 years thinking you were better than other people because of your bank account and your skin color. That kind of thinking is a disease. It makes you stupid. It makes you cruel, and eventually it makes you self-destruct. I don't hate sick people. I pity them." The conversation had haunted Vincent for weeks. The idea that his racism was viewed as a form of mental illness rather than a legitimate worldview was more devastating than any of the legal consequences he'd faced. Vincent's afternoons were spent in mandatory counseling sessions led by Dr. Angela Torres, a prison psychologist who specialized in helping inmates confront the thinking patterns that had led to their crimes. Dr. Torres had said during one of their early sessions, "You keep talking about your racist statements as if they were mistakes or errors in judgment." But they weren't mistakes. They were expressions of deeply held beliefs. Until you acknowledge that, you can't begin to change. "I'm not racist," Vincent had protested. "I was just stressed, angry about the flight situation." Vincent stressed. People don't spontaneously invent elaborate theories about racial hierarchies and social compatibility. You had those ideas already formed in your mind. The stress just made you express them publicly. The sessions had forced Vincent to confront uncomfortable truths about his upbringing, his career, and the assumptions he'd made throughout his life. Dr. Torres had made him write detailed accounts of his interactions with people of different races, examining how his prejudices had shaped his decisions in ways he'd never recognized. The exercise had been painful and enlightening. Vincent began to see how his racist assumptions had affected his hiring decisions, his choice of business partners, his selection of neighborhoods to live in, and even his charitable giving. His entire life had been shaped by prejudices he'd convinced himself were just preferences or standards. But the most transformative part of Vincent's incarceration had been his participation in a victim impact program, where he was required to read letters from people who'd been affected by his actions. The letters came from black passengers who'd seen his video and been reminded of their own experiences with discrimination. From parents who'd had to explain to their children why a grown man would say such hateful things. From business owners who'd lost opportunities because of the economic chaos his actions had triggered. One letter had been particularly devastating. It came from a young black medical student who'd been on a flight the week after Vincent's incident and had been treated with suspicion by flight attendants who'd clearly been influenced by the viral video. Mr. Blackwell. The letter read, "Your words didn't just hurt Dr. Rivers. They created a permission structure for other people to express their own prejudices. Your racism went viral, and now people like me have to deal with the consequences of your hatred every time we travel." Vincent had cried while reading that letter, the first time he'd cried since childhood. The realization that his actions had hurt not just Dr. Rivers, but countless other innocent people was more devastating than losing his business or his family. As his release date approached, Vincent had begun working with a nonprofit organization that helped formerly incarcerated individuals reintegrate into society. His caseworker, Jennifer Lopez, was a former prosecutor who'd left the legal field to focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. "Vincent, you've made genuine progress in here," she told him during one of their final meetings. "But the real test comes when you get out. The world isn't going to forgive you just because you've served your time. You're going to have to earn redemption through your actions, not your words." Vincent understood. His name would forever be associated with racism and hatred. No amount of apologies or community service could completely erase the damage he'd done. But maybe if he worked hard enough and long enough, he could transform from a cautionary tale into something resembling a redemption story. The question was whether he had the strength and humility to do the work. 2 years after his release from federal prison, Vincent Blackwell was working the early morning shift at JFK International Airport as a member of the janitorial staff for a contract cleaning company. The job, paid $15 an hour, required him to wear a gray uniform with his name embroidered on the chest and involved cleaning the same bathrooms where he'd once hidden during the worst night of his life. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when he saw Dr. Samuel Rivers walking through Terminal 4, carrying the same worn leather messenger bag that Vincent had once viewed with such contempt. Dr. Rivers was heading toward the business class lounge, moving with the same quiet dignity that had infuriated Vincent 4 years earlier. Vincent froze his mop halfway to the bucket as memories of that night crashed over him like a physical wave. The racist words he'd spoken, the humiliation he'd endured, the systematic destruction of everything he'd spent his life building. All of it triggered by his inability to sit peacefully next to this man. Dr. Rivers noticed him immediately. Their eyes met across the terminal corridor, and for a moment time seemed suspended. Vincent expected disgust, anger, or at least cold dismissal. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like sadness. Dr. Rivers approached slowly, his expression neutral but not hostile. "Mr. Blackwell." "Dr. Rivers." Vincent replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to apologize. I know it's too late. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for what happened to me, but for what I put you through, for the hatred I expressed, for the person I was." Dr. Rivers studied him for a moment, taking in the gray uniform, the work-worn hands, the genuine remorse in Vincent's eyes. "Mr. Blackwell, apologies are important, but what matters more is what you've learned. I've learned that I was sick." Vincent said the words Dr. Torres had helped him understand. "I was infected with ideas that made me cruel and stupid. I spent 2 years in prison and 2 more years working to understand how my racism hurt people I'd never even met. And what do you do with that understanding now?" Vincent straightened slightly, finding his voice. "I volunteer at a community center in Queens teaching basic financial literacy to kids whose parents work jobs like this one. I speak at schools about the consequences of hatred. I try to use my story as a warning rather than an excuse." Dr. Rivers nodded slowly. "Everyone deserves a second chance to show their true character, Mr. Blackwell. The question is, what will you do with yours?" "I'll keep working," Vincent said simply. "Not for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But for the chance to do more good than harm with whatever time I have left." Dr. Rivers extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Vincent shook it. The handshake was brief, formal, but it represented something profound. The possibility that even someone who'd fallen as far as Vincent Blackwell could begin the long journey back toward humanity. "Take care of yourself." "Mr. Blackwell?" Dr. Rivers said quietly, then continued toward his gate. Vincent watched him go, then returned to his mop and bucket. He had bathrooms to clean, floors to sweep, and a lifetime of damage to repair. But for the first time in 4 years, he felt something that might eventually become hope. Epilogue. 5 years later. Vincent Blackwell stood in front of a group of high school students in Detroit, Michigan. His hair had gone completely gray, and his face bore the lines of someone who'd learned hard lessons through bitter experience. He no longer wore expensive suits or commanded boardrooms. Instead, he wore a simple button-down shirt and spoke with the quiet authority that comes from genuine transformation. "Before I show you this video," he told the students, "I want you to understand that the person you're about to see was me at my absolute worst. I'm not proud of who I was, but I share this story because I want you to understand how hatred can destroy everything you think you've built." He pressed play on the video that had made him infamous, the same footage that had been watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. The students watched in shocked silence as the man they knew as a humble volunteer revealed himself as the airplane racist whose downfall had become a cautionary tale taught in schools across the country. That man lost everything. His family, his business, his freedom, his reputation, Vincent said when the video ended. But more importantly, that man had become something that wasn't even human anymore. He was just a collection of prejudices and hatred wearing an expensive suit. A student raised her hand. "What changed you?" Vincent smiled sadly. "Prison helped. Therapy helped. But what really changed me was understanding that my racism wasn't just wrong. It was stupid. Dr. Rivers was everything I claimed to respect. Successful, educated, accomplished, dignified. My prejudices made me incapable of recognizing excellence when it was sitting right next to me." Another student asked, "Do you ever talk to Dr. Rivers now?" "No," Vincent replied, "and I don't expect to. Some damage can't be completely repaired, only acknowledged and learned from. Dr. Rivers owes me nothing. Not forgiveness, not friendship, nothing. The best I can do is use my story to help prevent others from making the same mistakes." Vincent had been speaking at schools, community centers, and corporate diversity training sessions for 3 years. He didn't get paid for these appearances. His schedule was managed by a nonprofit organization that specialized in rehabilitation and education. His message was always the same. Hatred was not just morally wrong, but practically destructive, a form of stupidity that made people incapable of seeing the world clearly. The students filed out quietly, many of them visibly moved by what they'd witnessed. Vincent packed up his simple materials and prepared for the long bus ride back to New York, where he would return to his job cleaning office buildings and his small apartment in Queens. He would never be rich again. He would never be powerful again. He would never be respected in the business world again. But Vincent Blackwell had become something more valuable than wealthy or powerful. He had become genuinely human. And in a world where hatred still poisoned too many hearts, that transformation was perhaps the most important lesson he could offer. The man who had once declared he wouldn't fly with black people now spent his life teaching others that such hatred was not just wrong, but the fastest path to destroying everything that truly mattered. It was a hard-won wisdom purchased at the cost of everything he'd once valued. But it was wisdom nonetheless, and Vincent Blackwell was determined to share it with anyone willing to listen, because sometimes the best way to fight hatred is to show people exactly where it leads.